Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name's Shyam Oza. I'm a senior product manager here at AvePoint. And today I'm going to be talking about part two of our survival guide for SharePoint, fixing your SharePoint environment. So you've got your wacky users out there. They're deleting content. They're putting content in the wrong place. They're asking you where it is. We're going to provide you some quick tips, tools, and solutions on how to get some sanity back in your day-to-day life as an IT pro. So for some of you guys who are joining us for the first time, AvePoint has been in the SharePoint space for quite a lot of time. Well over a decade. We've been working on software and solutions for SharePoint since it was codenamed Tahoe, actually. And now, obviously, that's naturally extended into Office 365 and other solutions. And thanks to partners and clients like yourselves on the line, we've had significant growth over the last 8 years. We've even won Microsoft's Partner of the Year award this year once more in the collaboration and content category. So couldn't have done that without you guys and your support out there. We originated in 2001. We had two employees coding away in a public library to build our first backup and recovery solution. And since then, we've kind of skyrocketed to where we are here with 1,500 employees. We're in 13 countries on 5 continents. Unfortunately, we haven't quite gotten the penguins in Antarctica into SharePoint yet. We've got 14,000 customers and growing. Hopefully, if you're not already one of our accounts after this survival guide, you'll love our tools and solutions and kind of join that happy family. So, a little bit about how we got to where we are today. Not only have we grown as a company, but our solutions have matured. So like I said, back in 2001, we had originally built backup and recovery for the original version of Microsoft SharePoint. And as we engaged with a lot of our customers over time, they started to introduce problems around infrastructure management. So how do I ensure that my SharePoint environment continues to run fine? Is there something you can optimize with my storage? And then it started to get more into the end user focused area where we started looking at how IT professionals dealt with things like permissions, security audits, and reporting. And so over time, we've kind of pieced together this single integrated platform for end-to-end SharePoint maintenance. And again, if you're just tuning in for the first time, this is, like I said, part two of our SharePoint guide. Part one focused on assessment and reporting, so really understanding what areas to target in your SharePoint environment, what's wrong, where are the trouble spots, where should I be keeping an eye out in particular, and then really importantly, how do I report that information and kind of target my strategy in being transparent to the team and the business. So not only as an IT professional, do you have to be clear to the other people on your SharePoint team, but you may have to reach out to the guys on the storage teams, the SQL guys, and then other, more business-focused stakeholders like security officers, the CTO, CIO, and other individuals. And obviously the end users of SharePoint themselves. Today's session, I want to focus on fixing some of these problems. So you learned in the previous session on what to look for and how to find them. But I'm going to talk about how to fix these things with some really cool tools and solutions that we have. And when you're fixing a SharePoint environment, there's, a lot of you guys are probably sitting there going, wow, there's a lot that's wrong with SharePoint. Where do I start first? And the way you want to target your solutions is to look for the maximum impact, right? Where's the most ROI you can get? What can you fix first and see the most benefits? And typically the 3 common pain areas that we see that have the best results are around permissions and security management. So getting who has access and control locked down and in order. Then data optimization, whether that's ensuring that things are in the right place. So if an end user goes and looks for a specific document, maybe they're looking for a proposal, an RFI, an RFP, a battle card if there's a sales rep. Being able to discover the data is very important, but also optimizing your data from an infrastructure perspective, ensuring that it's not bogging down your core components. And then lastly, you want to look at your information architecture. How are sites structured? What is happening with the look and feel of my sites? What templates are we using? Are the appropriate settings like versioning, IRM, and the rest in place? So making sure the site structure is important is great for optimizing navigation and performance. And configurations, obviously you want a uniform look throughout your SharePoint environment. You want every single site to look the same or kind of give a user some kind of context on where they've arrived or where they're going in that navigation. It's just like building a good web page, right? You should think exactly the same about SharePoint. And a lot of those things are dependent on buttons and dials in SharePoint. So kind of managing those from a day-to-day can have the best impact, but it can also be cumbersome. So we'll take a look at how to tackle these three core areas first. And the way you really have to think about addressing these is not that, oh, I have a permissions problem, or, oh, I need to fix my IA, but to actually understand what the business problem is behind that solution, because then you can explain it to your higher ups. You can explain it to management on why this is important, why you need to work on this first. And you need space and time and resources to dedicate to this, because not only is it a infrastructure challenge, an IT and a management challenge, but it's also a business challenge. You always have to learn how to position it that way. And so when you think about permissions management and security, actually look at the core business problem. So when you share content with individuals in SharePoint, whether that's in your internal organization or outside of that organization, you're effectively just granting them permissions, right? And that could be to a user, it could be to a group, it could be an internal or external person from your domain. And the benefits many people see on the business side is, well, I can quickly and easily share a document with a partner, with a client, with a team member. It's great for collaboration. The number one business problem, though, is, well, we also run the risk of a data leak. And in order to clarify that a little bit more, you really want to look at the true impact of poor permissions in both SharePoint Server and Office 365. Some of you guys out there might be on-prem. Some of you guys might be cloud cowboys. And then I know the majority of organizations are kind of tackling a hybrid deployment. But when you really think about poor permissions in SharePoint Server, the first thing you want to think about is when you have a complex security structure, you're actually going to negatively impact Active Directory. This might be something you manage, or there might be another team out there that manages it, but either way, you're going to impact Active Directory. So as you break inheritance, as individual objects are assigned explicit permissions, or you're going ahead and inviting these very large AD groups that are deeply nested, what you end up running into are performance impacts, because you've got these constant calls and queries to AD when you're trying to resolve identities. Now, typically in a SharePoint Server environment, you're saying, well, everything's behind my firewall. The only users that have access to this content, work within my company. But that doesn't mean that the sharing feature can't create a data leak of its own within your walls. And one of the most common scenarios you have is some kind of a breach of an ethical wall or barrier, where you have a team, maybe a legal department, maybe in financial services, you have an investment practice, and they're not supposed to be talking to other teams. Maybe they represent other clients, maybe they represent other interests within the business, and having a leak of content on a project or a client between these walls can be a huge problem within the organization. And the last thing is, actually, from a business and a content perspective, what you see in your search results isn't just dependent on proper metadata tagging, classification, full text search, and things like that, but you're also going to see things in search that you have access to. You're never going to see something in SharePoint Search that you don't have permissions to. And this actually evolves into a much broader and to some people a much more frightening scenario in Office 365, where you look at a new feature like Delve. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with the Delve capability, what Delve in Office 365 does is actually look at what you are doing on a day-to-day as a user, what types of documents you're working on. So maybe I'm working on components related to a cloud or a software as a service application within my organization, or I'm working on, a specific project in the oil and gas vertical, right? So talking about engineering documents and things like that. And in that scenario, what Delve is going to do is learn what you're working on. What are the key words? Who are you working with on these projects? And then based on that, it will actually surface content to you in this dashboard, in this kind of feed that shows you content that you might be interested in based on tags and relevancy, content that other people who may be of interest to you are working on. So it's a great way to find a subject matter expert. If you're working on something about the cloud and somebody has cloud as a tag in their Ask Me About, this is just one of many, many ways they can be surfaced. And again, while this is awesome for collaboration, while it might help you find a document, while you're in a pinch and you need some information on a particular topic, it's also going to reveal information to you based on the permissions model. So if you have access to something and it meets certain criteria, Delve will surface it to you. If you see something, or if you're selected as having some kind of relevance for an object, or a document or a site, but you don't have permission to see it, even though it's relevant to you as far as Delve is concerned, it won't surface it to you because you don't have access. And I think one of the biggest things we have to consider is in the SharePoint server world, even though it wasn't great, some people were getting by through security through ignorance, where you basically had a set of users who didn't know they had access to content unless they explicitly went there. And now Delve basically creates this potential breach where content can be exposed to somebody even if they didn't try to actively go out and seek it, right? So this excuse of, people don't know how to access the site, or, they more than likely they won't be able to access this site or navigate to this location, that becomes an even poorer excuse in the Office 365 realm. The same thing, now that external sharing is a feature that's much easier to use in Office 365, you're no longer talking about internal breaches only. So now I can share content with somebody outside of my domain as long as they can authenticate via Live ID. And the fear here is, I can share with anybody without any kind of approval process. And as well, we know end users make mistakes. We make mistakes. You type the wrong email, you type the wrong domain, maybe you type Outlook instead of Hotmail, or whatever it might be, and suddenly you've given access to a document to a complete stranger or the wrong authority. And even if you're only using OneDrive for Business, whether that's your first step into the cloud or your first experience with Office 365, or you're using OneDrive as that first hybrid extension of your SharePoint server environment, OneDrive for Business isn't excluded from any of these things. So all of the sharing features and functionality count in OneDrive for Business as well. So the first demonstration I'm going to show you guys today is really a quick and easy way to discover permissions in your SharePoint environment, find out if they're appropriate or not, and then take action. And that includes things like being able to promote, demote, or revoke permissions outright. So permissions management can be a very troublesome area, and the issue there is the fact that permissions can be assigned at the site collection level, and when they're assigned at the site collection level, things are typically pretty straightforward. So for example, if I assign permissions at the accounting site collection level, that will slowly propagate through the accounting site and all of the subsites and child sites within that natural tree. Now, one of the concerns is it's very easy to go ahead and uh, break inheritance on a site or break inheritance, especially on an individual document, and now suddenly you have more complex permissions within your SharePoint environment. If you've got hundreds of thousands of sites, um, or even a few hundred sites, but very complex permissions at the item level, you can notice impact to things like Active Directory, um, to load times for the actual site, and this can all result in a poor experience for your end users, but also um, cause issues with your infrastructure and other things that may dependent or be interdependent on these components. For example, Active Directory obviously isn't just a reference for SharePoint. It's for Exchange and all of your other business critical applications. So there's a number of ways the DocAv Administrator tool helps with permissions management. The first and simplest is actually directly in the GUI interface, showing you if inheritance is or is not broken within the environment. So you actually have the ability to go in, check specific configurations, check the site permissions, and obviously at any point you can open the site within your browser, take a look inside. So it's very easy to get in to the environment, see what's going on, take a look at the site contents, take a look at the site settings, and kind of get a very quick and easy understanding of what is happening within the site. And you can see obviously here the site has different permissions, or some content within the site has different permissions. So inheritance somewhere within this site has actually broken. And typically what happens is an administrator has to either via PowerShell or via manually actually doing visual checks on the environment, actually try and find where permissions are broken. Whereas in the DocAv interface, it's very easy for me to open up the environment and see here I've got regular nodes that are inheriting permissions and other nodes that are behaving with explicit and unique permissions. So what's really cool is you can detect a node like this if it's an ad hoc fix, go to your security tab within the environment, and actually decide whether you want to break inherit permissions or enforce inheritance from the parent nodes. Now, while that's great for an ad hoc fix, some of you guys may be saying, well, what happens when I know this is a much larger problem? In that scenario, what you can actually do is run a administrative search. And in this admin search, you actually have quite a few criteria that you can look for. So for example, here within this list or library setting environment, I can check to see if versioning is enabled or disabled, or other advanced configurations are enabled or disabled as a search criteria. But if we're talking about handling this management at a much higher level, I can actually go to the web application level, run an admin search and say, okay, I want to see any site collection or site where inheritance is broken, right? So if explicit permissions are being granted. Add that as a filter criteria. Again, the abilities and functions that you have access to, whether they're at the document level, list, library, all of these are also available to you. This is just one example of being able to configure a search. And actually, once these searches are complete, you have the ability to then actually dive into the report that you have completed, so to view your search results. And once you've actually performed that search, the tree will modify itself and actually start to show you all of the nodes that meet your search criteria. So now what happens is, instead of you having to visually discover the content even within our interface, you can actually go ahead, grab a web application, and then actually go ahead and move permissions. So if you wanted to clone the permissions from one web application to another, or dive a little bit deeper, for example, go down to the site collection level here, and then you can see you can actually push and either break permissions or reactivate um, item and permissions inheritance from that parent object. So whether it's the web application, if it's a subsite asking for propagation um, through the parent site collections. So one very, very easy way to handle and manage permissions from an explicit permission standpoint. Now, permissions, as we have discussed before, aren't just about optimizing performance and reducing the headache or the overhead that's occurring between Active Directory, but it's also something that you want to avoid when it comes to security and compliance. So instead of looking at it from a configurations and administrative standpoint, you can also take a look at security from a user or group standpoint. So what's really cool is you can pivot on the content scope, let's say, for example, like site collection, and then within that site collection, actually perform an advanced search for certain users. So maybe I'm interested in knowing where Ian has access to his data. And again, this function is very similar to the SharePoint, the people picker that you see across Office applications. So here, I found Ian within my Contoso tenant, and I can actually check to see what level of permissions or access Ian has across that entire scope. Now, if I'm not interested in what Ian has access to, or I haven't exactly targeted my audience or my culprit, I have the ability also to perform a generic search for any permission level, maybe a specific permission level. Maybe we're just worried about high sensitivity permissions with full control. And I can search whatever level of permission I want at any object level within SharePoint. And once this scan is actually completed, I will get a report that I can export to SharePoint, that I can export to an Excel file or a CSV, and then provide to an auditing officer, keep as a record of what the security and permissions were at a specific point in time, or actually immediately take action on that list and either grant additional permissions, clone those permissions, export the SharePoint groups for bulk editing, which is a very useful feature. Maybe you want to delete those users and groups and actually revoke the permissions, or maybe you want to tweak these permissions, take somebody from read, promote them up to contribute, maybe take somebody from contribute down and bump them down to a view only or read only permission level. So one of the things that's great about DocAv Administrator is it's going to help you solve your security and permissions management problems both from a higher configuration level, which is around ensuring inheritance and settings are being enforced, as well as on a very granular user and group-based strategy. So now that you've got the permissions management issues out of the way and squared away, and you've gotten an introduction to some of our tools and solutions, the next business problem we really want to look at is around being able to access content. So one of the great benefits of Office 365 or SharePoint Server, when it's configured properly, you can enable your users within the office to find documents and information quickly, but also if they're remote, discover content and information quickly. But one of the things that happens is when you have a lot of people uploading content, you enter this world of content sprawl, and it bogs down both your infrastructure as well as cause problems in your business. So again, as far as the end users are concerned, the true business problem is the impact of being able to discover content when you need it and the inability to be productive. But the way you have to look at it is there's two types of impact, right? And the first might be invisible to your end users, but it's definitely visible to you, and it's something that they'll start to notice. So thinking about content sprawl, think about the impact to your infrastructure, right? And this can be done through poor permissions and other components. So for example, if you have versioning and people have versioning that's completely out of control, somebody set it to 50 versions or 100 minor versions or whatever it might be. Not having control of your versioning settings can quickly bloat a site. Now, whenever content is committed into SharePoint, by default it goes into SQL. You might have heard about this before. They're called blobs. When you have a lot of content sitting in SQL and you're starting to hit that content database limit, you'll actually notice that blobs can have a very severe impact on the performance of SQL and then inherently on the performance of your SharePoint servers, and that ultimately impacts your end users. Pages don't load quickly. They may not be able to access applications as quickly as they want. And that application scenario is something people also don't tend to think about. When you're connecting the dots, many organizations have a lot of line of business applications where data is either sitting inside of SharePoint and they're pulling it via lookup columns or they're referencing it. So a lot of, especially in SharePoint 2013, a lot of apps may have app data that's sitting in SharePoint sites. And if that site's not performing well, then inherently that application is not going to perform well. In addition to that, if SharePoint is used as a presentation layer for these applications, then again, if there's too much data, if there's something else causing issues where the web front ends just cannot surface information to you, or there's a lot of calls to SQL, you're going to see poor performance in your line of business applications as well. So the impact to your infrastructure is actually very, very significant. Don't just think about SQL. And then lastly, what everyone's going to say, right, is it's not just an infrastructure problem, it's a business problem too. And there's a lot of studies out there that show that when content is located in the wrong place, people end up duplicating work. So if I can't find something, I'm going to take the initiative and build that content out myself. Maybe it's a compete document, maybe it's a brand new proposal, whatever it might be. A lot of time is wasted in trying to find content. People become frustrated and they end up duplicating work. So not only is this bad for business, but it just feeds back into that loop we were just talking about where you have content sprawl. So now you have multiple copies of the truth, you have redundancies all over SharePoint that are hurting your business, but also clogging up SQL. And a lot of time is wasted even just trying to coordinate collaboration. So what site is the content in? Can you send me a link? How do I get to it quickly? And a lot of these things can lead to end user frustration. And one of the things you don't want to happen is users just give up on your SharePoint platform or your Office 365 platform, and they start to default to email. And then you just kind of have this cycle of, a lack of productivity, but you also have this major concern where the investments you've made in something like SharePoint or Office 365 are completely gone to waste because everyone is just defaulted to using email and nothing else. So we'll take a look at here a couple demo scenarios on ensuring that content is relevant, so making sure it's in the right place, and also how archiving content not only is good and healthy for your SQL and your storage, and ultimately the health of SharePoint, but also how we can help ensure that people are discovering content that's fresh and relevant to them. So in this scenario, what we're going to look at is using the DocAv content management tool to take a site collection which was created in error and actually modify the information architecture to turn that site collection into a subsite beneath another parent site collection. So in our scenario, we have our accounting site collection. There's a design in place. We have our loan applications, bills of sale, and other components and records within the site collection. One of the users in our environment accidentally created a separate site collection, the documentation site collection, which contains a lot of supporting information for the accounting site. It's of a very specific nature, so we don't want to dump it all into the same library. We want it to be part of a subsite, but we want it to be related to the accounting site collection. So for example, if we were to go into accounting, take a look at the site contents, we'll see that there are currently no subsites here. And obviously the reason you want to leverage the subsite feature, first of all, it's a great way to isolate content. Maybe you have a specific set of users who should only have access to the content in that subsite, or it's a great way to logically separate specific functions. So you might have a subsite that's storing back office data while the main landing page is kind of acting as the presentation layer or the surface for your content. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into the Content Manager module within the DocAve suite. And as you can see here, I've already navigated into my SharePoint 2013 farm. This is my production environment. I've got my web applications. If you expand out the web application, you'll see all of the site collection that you have living underneath. And for example, here I have the accounting site collection selected. And again, take a look. If I click sites, I'm not going to get anything because there are no sites currently living under this main web. Then in order to perform a move, I'm actually going to select my documentation site collection because this is the one I want to move. Navigate to the corresponding node in the destination. This time I am going to locate my accounting site. And now I've created my one-to-one mapping, right? So I've got my documentation site collection. I have my accounting site collection. And I'm going to perform a copy function. Typically what you'll see when you're performing a copy move is a predefined set of configurations. So these are the default values you can set if you're constantly moving content regularly, or if you have a standard kind of operating procedure and how you want to copy or move content. Obviously, in some scenarios, you're going to want to edit that behavior or define that behavior initially. So with a quick walkthrough, we have the original option. This is a major choice, right? If you're using the attach logic, any object that you've selected to move will actually be hooked underneath in the hierarchy with that parent object. So for example, if I select a site collection and I attach something to it, it will become a site. If you attach something to a site, it will become a subsite of that. The merge functionality is utilized to maybe bring two very similar site collections or sites that had a very similar business purpose, or in the case of document libraries, two libraries that were storing similar types of information and actually merge that content together. Obviously, when you merge information, you will have a series of conflict resolutions that you can choose from, whether you want to overwrite content if it's redundant, replace it, append a new version, or even have some kind of manual resolution to decide which copy of the truth stays. So again, we're going to stick with our attach logic. One of the things that's really important is all of the SharePoint permissions and configurations for a site by default typically inherit down from the parent site collection. So if we were to maintain the configuration setting, this is list views, content types, columns, and basically versioning settings, anything you can think of as a configuration, a dial or a button that controls the behavior of the content within that site. Security is all about permissions. If you copy the security or you choose to basically maintain and preserve the security, what will happen is in the destination, we will automatically break inheritance and bring over the security model of the original site collection and make that the de facto security model of the site and the destination. So we're actually going to go ahead and uncheck the security feature because what we want to do is we want to inherit the permissions and control from the parent site collection, from the accounting site collection. Not worried about managed metadata. There's also a series of advanced features. If you have metadata columns, maybe you want plain text and you want to match that to a managed metadata column. If you've got the default content types in the source site and you've created your own custom content types for documents, you have the ability to map item content types. You can even do things like user mapping. So you may have a pre-production environment or a staging environment where you have dummy users and you want to migrate that to a production environment or a publishing environment where you have a different set of users or even an entirely different domain that you want to map to. So once you've reviewed your settings and you're happy, it's as simple as just hitting the Run Now function. And once you click Run Now, what will actually happen is the Doc App Manager will kick off what we call a job. That job at any point can be tracked within our job monitor, and this is for all applications across the suite. So for example, right now we're looking at our Content Manager functions, but at any time and later on, any of the other modules that are present within the application, you'll be able to see and track the status of those operations. Many times as an IT pro, you're going to be running many operations at once. So we're going to go ahead and let the Content Manager job run. And then once the progress completes, we'll view the results and see what it looks like within our production environment. So now that the job's completed, we can actually take a look at the job details. In our scenario, we actually were able to successfully move all of the content without encountering any issues. However, if you were to encounter a problem, you'll see we actually have a very thorough breakdown from the web application level all the way down to the individual folder and even item level, so it can get very detailed, moving through looking at folders, the document layer, and you'll receive comments on whether this was a failure due to something wrong with the SharePoint environment, whether there were permissions issues, whether a file was under some kind of read lock, whatever the scenario might have been that caused that object to fail to migrate successfully or be restructured successfully, will be provided to you so you can troubleshoot it and then follow up in a quick maintenance move of your content. So now that the operation is actually completed, we can take a look at what's happened. And now within the accounting site collection, we can see that the documentation site has been created. And again, just to show you this is not the same site collection, I can hover over this. You can see it's under our internal portal, under the accounting site collection, under the new documentation site that was created. Whereas if I'm looking here, I can see I have the intranet portal sites, and then immediately at the top level, my documentation as a site collection. So you can see that everything has come over in a like-for-like fashion. So all of the documentation that I'm interested in, the metadata based on who it was created by, when it was created, what time, who it's being shared with, is all there. And one of the things that's really important is if we were to actually go ahead and look at our site settings and we look at our site permissions, you'll notice that this site is inheriting from its parent, which is the accounting site collection. Again, remember, if we had previously hit that security option, we would have actually broken inheritance and brought over the security settings specifically from the documentation site collection. In this case, it was preserved. So that concludes the demonstration of understanding how to quickly and easily manage your IA using our Content Manager tool. And keep in mind, the key business reason for doing this is not just so we can manage and move content from non-production to production environments, but because the value and purpose of content may change over time. We need to restructure our site collections in order to make content easily discoverable. We want to change our hierarchy so we can clean up permissions. There may be a number of reasons why we want to move content around, and DocApp Content Manager makes that very easy and seamless. One of the things I've always found interesting about data archival is it's always looked at as a records management or compliance solution. And While that's typically true in many business scenarios, I think what's really important is that it's also a key component in um, keeping content fresh and usable by the end users, and improving that relevancy of content, as well as making content more easily discoverable. And two great examples of that um, are first with the oil and gas industry, looking at safety documentation and engineering documentation. You want that to be the latest and greatest. So, based on metadata or modified time or whatever it might be, you want to ensure that any old, inaccurate safety documents are taken offline while the fresh and relevant content stays available to those business critical assets you have out on um, oil rigs and engineering sites and things like that. The second scenario is the ability to clean up content so it's more easily discoverable. If you have a document library with hundreds of thousands of files um, located within it, and you have a mobile workforce trying to access these documents via a smartphone or a tablet computer, and they may be on the show floor, having a document library that's cluttered with content can really make that search and discovery experience difficult um, for that user. So keeping things outside of your environment aren't just compliance and records management scenarios. So definitely keep that in mind while we actually take a look at Archiver in action. So jumping right into our interface, we can see we have the human resources site that I was just looking at within my farm node. And I've gone ahead and created a rule. If we want to take a look at this rule um, in a bit more detail, we can dive right in. And basically what we're doing is we're looking for any content in the form of documents within SharePoint where the name or a specific modified by value is equal to Ian, who is no longer with the organization. And what we want to do is take those legacy documents that Ian had been working on and actually removing them um, from the environment. And what we want to do is we want to archive that data and store it offsite outside of SharePoint. And the reason we want to do that, obviously, is there may be a need to um, bring that content back, um, to start working on it again if there's a new project, or maybe provide that content to a security officer or someone else in the case of litigation or an e-discovery, request. Now, once that's done and I'm happy with my rules, I can actually go ahead and apply the rules to that site collection. And those rules can be very complex. You can add and or logic, multiple layers of filters and complexity, really to target and focus the content that you want to remove. Once you do that, as with any DocF product, you have the ability to jump directly into the job monitor. And what you'll see here is, in addition to test runs, previously I ran a test run. This is actually going to help confirm whether or not the content will successfully be detected and removed without actually touching anything in SharePoint. The second job type you'll see is a scan job, and that's what's running right now. In this scenario, what we're actually doing is scanning for the content, tagging that content, and marking it as something that will be archived. In this scenario where you may have an archivist or a records manager within the organization, or a different type of data owner, they may be the ones who have the final word on whether content actually should be either destroyed or taken offline or moved, whatever the scenario might be. And what our application actually allows you to do is, when the scan process is completed, send that job over to this data owner, the person who's responsible for the data, and have them actually look at the scan results and then sign off on the archive operation, or actually reject the archive operation if it's necessary. Since we don't have that manual process, we jump right into the archival and indexing of that content so it becomes searchable in the future. But overall, these are the steps in the archive process. And again, at any time, you have the ability to jump into the application so I can go in and look at my archive operation, view the details, and I can see kind of here, if I go for my successful objects, or sorry, for my deleted objects, I can see here that a number of documents were actually removed, and these are all the items that belonged to Ian. So if you want to see that kind of live in action again, you can see here I have a whole bunch of documents from Bill and Christine and the rest of the team, but then you also see I have documents here from Ian at Contoso. And if I go ahead and refresh my site, you'll actually see that all of the content that Ian was the owner of has now been cleared out. And what's fantastic about that is you don't have to do a manual discovery across a very, very large SharePoint environment, and you can very easily pivot on users, metadata, and any combination of values you may have to identify stale or irrelevant content. So very, very powerful, just the tip of the iceberg for what you can do with the archiver component. Great. So now that we've looked at Content Manager and our archiver solutions, the last business problem we want to look at is actually understanding what happens after you fix a problem. I'm glad we were able to discover it. How do I avoid the same problem or problems of a similar nature going forward? And the main reason this impacts IT is we now live in a world where we not only have to ensure that SharePoint is running smoothly, the servers have enough memory, everything's properly load balanced, we're patching things on Tuesdays, but IT is kind of being pushed by the business to be more front and center. And so you're looking at the traditional role, which is that kind of that maintenance and cleanup role that we've had over the last couple of years in order to ensure SharePoint is running smoothly, making sure that configurations stay within desired states. You're meeting all of the SLAs on site uptime, content retrieval, and you're working really well with your other teams, right? SQL teams, storage teams, and other IT teams. And there's a lot of work there, and that's not going to go away even if you're on-prem or in the cloud. So that's your day-to-day. And then at the same time, you're being asked by management and by your end users to help drive the adoption of these new initiatives, whether it's OneDrive for Business, whether it's getting people familiar with team sites and collaboration sites in your intranet. And you're also getting feedback from the field on how SharePoint and other technologies can help you in competitive situations, how you can enable the field, right? So you want to be able to train your kind of road warriors on how to quickly access documents in case they need support in the field. And you definitely want to get them off of using legacy file shares and email. We know all of the pains about that. I mean, AvePoint ourselves, we've got some great webinars and content on why you want to move away from file shares and email, but the entire world will tell you why you want to move off of those platforms. And the only way you're going to do that, the only way you're going to increase adoption and get people off these old systems is to train the teams. And the only way you're going to train the teams is by being in front of them, whether it's through monthly trainings, quarterly trainings, whether you're doing lunch and learns, inviting everybody. Okay, hey, I'm going to invite the North America sales team or the East Coast sales team in, and these regional guys, we're going to have a quick lunch and learn. Maybe we'll order a bunch of pizza. Everyone comes in. We're going to show them all of the great technology and solutions that we have. And these are just one of many ways IT can actually get in front of the business. But that back office role never goes away, and you're looking and struggling at this this problem where you have this very delicate balancing act between the traditional role of IT and the new modern role of IT. And so what you need is either a time machine, which doesn't exist, or a way to have proactive management. And that's actually going to be our next major topic in the survival guide, but I'm going to give you a quick sneak peek of that through our policy enforcer interface now. One of the things that can drive a SharePoint admin absolutely insane is trying to balance um, between managing and maintaining your environment and going ahead and getting in front of the business and training them properly and exposing them to the technology and the investments that your organization has made so they can work better um, day to day. And this is meant to be kind of just the tip of the iceberg in what we can do from a policy enforcement or a proactive governance standpoint. But if you go ahead and look at um, what's happening within our site collection, you'll actually see that when we open up our um, human resources intranet site collection, there are a couple desired states that are in place. You have the look and feel, you have your versioning settings, uh, you have other components and key settings in your SharePoint environment that really matter to you. So, for example, if I go to my um, documents library and I go ahead and I check um, versioning settings or information rights management, these are all states that I would want. So, for example, here we can see content approval is not on, versioning is not enabled, and even the look and feel of the site, somebody's gone ahead and customized it, and it doesn't really sit up to our corporate standards. So what's great is I have the ability to dive into applications like our policy enforcer and pre-populate this list with a number of settings. So the sort of the desired states of my versioning settings, what library settings should look like, what site theme we use throughout the organization to maintain consistency in corporate branding. And again, you'll see we have configuration, security, management, and actually even in the custom section, you can write your own DLLs, um, drop them in, and then manage your SharePoint environment proactively. So not only do we have these rules and configurations, but you can actually go ahead and apply that operation and constantly watch for what's going on in your environment. And the way we build that, you can see here, is through SharePoint auditing and scanning through the standard SharePoint API. So what we've effectively done is turn on the proper auditing components. We've applied a set of custom rules and policies to that site collection. And now what we've done is actually set up both a monitoring as well as an enforcement mechanism that complies with our settings, our desired states. You can actually go ahead and see the progress just like we do for any of our other applications, whether it's backup, archiving, content management, that we're basically deploying our basic governance policy profile to this site collection. So now that that's completed, what we're actually going to do is take a look at our dashboard so you have the ability to generate a report very quickly. And you'll actually see that there are things that fall out of our desired states. So, for example, the human resources site was violating the site theme. There was a documents library that was violating the library versioning settings rule. But again, to give you that peace of mind, you can actually see here with this little health icon that we've gone ahead and fixed that problem for you automatically. So if we dive back and look at our SharePoint site collection, our human resources site collection, you'll actually notice immediately on refresh, we're going back to the older theme. If I were to jump into my documents library and look at the settings, you'll actually see here, I go to versioning settings, content approval is now on, versioning is approved, the desired states for maintaining 3 versions is there. And what's important is if anybody goes in and modifies these settings out of bounds, the policy enforcement mechanism that we've laid out here will constantly keep checking to ensure that it stays within those states. So even if something is perfect today, it could break tomorrow. If something's broken today, we want to fix it so we ensure that everything is always running the way it's supposed to, and you're spending more time in front of the business and less time managing these basic day-to-day tasks. So that's just a sneak peek at one of the few things you can do with our proactive governance and our policy enforcement mechanism. So I'm glad I was able to give you guys a real quick peek at proactive governance and kind of how to automate and keep SharePoint running smoothly, even when your end users are throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, into it. So in order to continue your path to success, our SharePoint Survival Guide series will continue. For the latest details, check us out on AvePoint.com. This webinar, the previous webinar on discovering and communicating problems that was run by one of my esteemed colleagues, John Hodges, is also available. And all of the schedules for the upcoming sessions, as well as the recordings and kind of companion content and quick links to demos, will all be available in our SharePoint Survival Guide section. And that's right on AvePoint.com. And not only will our survival guide be there, but there's tons of content, things like white papers, best practices for moving to Office 365, best practices on setting up backup plans and migration strategies. And you can learn about how other customers and partners have succeeded, plenty of case studies. And of course, if you liked some of the tools you saw today, if you'd like to take a peek into many of our other tools and solutions that we have plenty of demo videos and content available for you. So at this point, I'd definitely like to open the floor up to our Q&A session. Please feel free, whether you want to unmute your mics and have a chat, or if you're feeling a little shy, you want to type out your questions, go ahead and do that. I'll address them right now for you guys. All right, that's great. So glad we were able to address some of the concerns that people in the audience had. Very, very happy to get to present this informational session to you. Again, remember, this is only part 2 of our entire SharePoint Survival Guide series. Part 1 is already online. My section right now, Fixing Your SharePoint Environment, will be live soon, and there's plenty of companion content to go along with it. So definitely keep in touch with us at AvePoint.com. Thanks, guys.